Hello students and family members. Today we're focused on this question: how do we use bar models to solve multiplication word problems? Let's take a look at an in-depth and very detailed word problem that a 4th grade student may actually come across. Here it is. First I have to read it. Mr. Panza's class collected 17 boxes of mashed potatoes. Mrs. Grazer's class collected 2 times as many as Mr. Panza's class, and Mrs. Riley's class collected 4 times as many as Mr. Panza's class. So our question is, how many boxes of mashed potatoes did they collect as a collective 4th grade? In other words, how much did they collect in all? I've been teaching the students 2 ways that they can attack all forms of word problems. The first way is creating what I call a KWS chart. K is for what we know, W is for what we want to know or the question, and the S is how do we solve this with a math number sentence. So first, let's talk about what we know in this word problem. We know that there are 3 teachers: Mrs. Grazer, Mr. Panza, and Mrs. Riley. Anytime I'm trying to figure out exactly what I know, I create a picture, and that picture is going to be called a bar model. So I'm going to represent Mr. Panza's class, Mrs. Grazer's class, and Mrs. Riley's class with a picture bar model. What else do we know? 1, there are 3 teachers. 2, Mr. Panza is one of those teachers, and his class brought in 12 boxes of mashed potatoes. We know that Mrs. Grazer's class collected 2 times as many. So yes, that's a multiplication number sentence, but I also want the students to get used to creating these bar models so that they can actually see what they are doing, which means Mrs. Grazer's class not only collected 1 with a group of 12, but there are actually 2 bars that represent the total number of mashed potato boxes that Mrs. Grazer's class collected. In similar fashion, Mrs. Riley's class collected 4 times as many as Mr. Panza's class. So if 2 times as many is 2 bars, then Mrs. Riley's class is going to have 4 bars. And inside each of these bars is going to be the number 12 that represents 12 boxes of mashed potatoes. Think about the boxes, or these bars, 1, 2, 3, and 4, as my total number of groups, and think about the number inside of the boxes as what is in each group. So there are 4 groups of 12 for Mrs. Riley, there are 2 groups of 12 for Mrs. Grazer, and 1 group of 12 for Mr. Panza. Now that I've set up what I know, I need to know what I want to know based on this information. Because based on this information, I could solve a lot of questions. I could find the collective total. I could find how much more Mrs. Grazer or Mrs. Riley has than Mr. Panza. I could know just what Mrs. Grazer has or what Mrs. Riley has, which is not in the word problem. So I need to know what they are asking me. And this question wants to know how many boxes of mashed potatoes did 4th grade collect in all. So in my W category, I'm going to write some keywords. I'm looking for the total, and when I'm looking for the total, that typically means all, and that also either means it's an addition question or a multiplication question. I can take that information up into where I'm going to create a math number sentence to solve my actual answer. So remember, my question is how much do we have in all? In other words, it's going to be Mr. Panza's class plus Mrs. Grazer's class plus Mrs. Riley's class to equal the total. So my number sentence will eventually look like Mr. Panza plus Mrs. Grazer plus Mrs. Riley for a total. But we only know that Mr. Panza has 12. We do not know how much in all Mrs. Grazer had. We do not know how much in all Mrs. Riley had. But that's why it's so nice to create these bar models, because now I can look back and say, oh, well, 12 plus 12 is nothing more than repeatedly adding 12 twice. In other words, I'm taking 12 and I'm multiplying it by 2. And if I take 12 and I multiply it by 2 in my lattice board here, I'm going to get the total number that Mrs. Grazer's class collected. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 1 is 2. So there's my 4 and 2. So Mrs. Grazer's total, which is 2 times as many as Mr. Panza's, is 24. This is helpful now because I absolutely know that if I need Mrs. Riley's total, which I do, I'm going to take 12 plus 12 plus 12 plus 12, which I could certainly do because multiplication is repeated addition. But in this example, we know multiplication. So set up your bar model. Take 12, and instead of repeatedly adding 12 4 times, multiply it by your total number of groups, which in this case is represented by the total number of bars or boxes. And that's another reason why bar models are so helpful. We know now that 1, 2, 3, 4 is the total number of groups. And we also now know that that's what I must multiply by. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times 1 is 4. So when I drop down my 1's category, I get 8. And my 10's category gives me 4. So Mrs. Riley's total is 48. I'm now ready to answer what I was looking for all along. How much was the total in all in 4th grade? So I'm going to take these problems, which are written currently horizontal, and put them vertically on top of each other. Mr. Panza's class plus Mrs. Riley's class plus Mrs. Grazer's class will give me the answer for the total number of mashed potato boxes that 4th grade collected. And in order to make sure I'm totally and 100% accurate, I'm going to use touch points. I start with my largest number 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Carry your 1, bring down your 4. Again, to make sure I'm totally accurate, use touch points. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The total number of mashed potato boxes collected by the entire 4th grade in this question is 84. Another way you could use bar models I've already set up in this bottom question. If Mrs. Riley was collecting 2 liter bottles for a science project, and there were 9 boys in her class and 11 girls in her class, and the boys in her class brought in 3 bottles each, and the girls in her class brought in 4 bottles each, and Mrs. Riley needed 70 bottles, we could answer a couple of questions. First, I need to set up a K, W, which is what we want to know, S chart. What do we know? We know that there are a certain amount of boys, and remember, the boys are the total number of groups. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. How did I know that? Because it's something that I know in the word problem. There are 9 boys in her class, the total number of groups. How many bottles did each boy collect? That's also in the word problem. 3 bottles. So I could do 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3. Or I could do what I set up over here and figure out 9 times 3, which will tell me my total of 27 for how many bottles the boys brought in. I could do the same exact thing for the girls. I know that there are 11 girls in the class, so I create a bar model that shows me my total number of groups is 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. And each group there are 4 total of bottles. 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 32, 36, 40. Well, the song ends. No problem. Just use your touch points. 41, 42, 43, 44. So the total number of girls brought in 44 bottles. Does she have enough bottles to complete the project? Well, she needed 70. So what do we have to do? Take the total number that the boys brought in and the total number that the girls brought in and add them together. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Carry my 1. 4, 5, 6, 7. That's 71. Well, it says that she needed 70 bottles. So yes, she was able to collect as many bottles as she needed. And the total number of bottles she had left over would be nothing more than, well, she had 71. She needed 70. Complete the subtraction problem and figure out that she had 1 left over. This is the way that you should set up a KWS chart as well as use bar models to help solve word problems. We'll talk to you soon.